Get things situated. This morning's scripture reading is Psalm 8, verses 1 through 4. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. From the lips of children and infants, you have ordained praise because of your enemies, to silence the foe and the avenger. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, the Son of Man that you care for him?
Once again, I want to express to you my appreciation, my thanks for you being here and participating in the song service this morning. It's been particularly meaningful to me. Those songs, each and every one of them, have very special meaning to me. I hope that I have somewhat, to the best of my ability, kind of captured what I believe the message of Ecclesiastes to be. There is a difficulty in our world today, especially, of separating the world as it ought to be from the way that it really is. And I think preachers in particular live in a fantasy world of the way that it ought to be. A more perhaps colorful way of saying that is that preachers are far more heavenly minded than of any earthly use. But that is kind of our calling, is to help people to see the world the way that it really needs to be, and to call people to a higher level of behavior, a higher level of faith. But on the other hand, there are some people who never really are able to lift their eyes away from the way that the world really is. They never are able to lift their eyes to see the way the world should be. I think if I can understand him, this is the problem that Miguel Cervantes sought to overcome with his story Don Quixote. And if you've ever read the book, or if you have ever seen the play Man of La Mancha, you understand that Cervantes was getting people in his day and age to turn their eyes from the way that the world was to see the way the world could be. Which brings me to the topic then of what in the world the book of Ecclesiastes is all about. This has been a kind of a lengthy study. We've not gone through the book chapter by chapter or verse by verse by any stretch of the imagination. But what I wanted to do as we looked at the book was to focus on the major themes that I believe our narrator, our author, is trying to communicate to us. And so we began by looking at some key words, and throughout our series we have added to this list of words that we have been looking at. The first of which is very simply Kohelet. Kohelet. Who is Kohelet? Well, he's our narrator. He's the one that's telling the story. There are a lot of different ways our English translations try to identify this. Sometimes he is identified as the preacher. Sometimes he is the teacher. But he is the one who is working us through this, what I believe to be his lifelong journey. From the way he was as a young man, what he learned, and now as I picture him as an older, white-haired gentleman, perhaps sitting on a rock on a hill, overlooking Jerusalem, thinking back on his life and writing down what he wanted his sons, perhaps his grandsons, those who would be following him, what he wanted them to know, what he wanted them to learn. Certainly, key word in the book is this word hebel. It's spelled Hebel, but the pronunciation has a softer B sound, so it's pronounced hevel. And this word is translated primarily in the majority of translations, either vain or vanity. Another word that I believe that communicates the message of what Kohelet is trying to teach us is mist. It's a vapor. And as I have pointed out a number of times, this is the word, or this is the idea that James brings out, James chapter 4 and verse 14, that your life is just a mist. It's here for a moment and it's gone. Well, I think he's really echoing the message of Ecclesiastes. Hevel. It's a mist. It's a vapor. The next word that we looked at was, and I'm not exactly sure the pronunciation here, whether it's sama or sama, probably sama, that which is translated joy and rejoice. And we noticed how many times throughout the book, how many times Kohelet tells us to rejoice and to be happy. Well, not happy in the sense of choosing to rejoice, even though there's all these vain, misty things that are going on. But sama is translated joy, rejoice, take pleasure. And so it once again is a key word throughout the book. The next word that we looked at is the word evil. And this is where this balancing act comes in. That we are called to lift our eyes. We are called to joy. And we are called to take pleasure in the gifts that God has given us. But the fact is, and he repeats this throughout his narrative, some days evil wins. Bad people do win sometimes. Growing up, there was we had a youth rally in our congregation, and the theme of the youth rally, actually came about in a couple of ways. We had a retreat and also a youth rally. But we had a little metal pin, those little metal pins that you wear advertising various things. It was a picture of a knight, and he's walking along, and his lance is broken. So he's carrying just this little stub of a lance, and his little face helmet thing has been smashed and it's all broken. And you can tell that his coat of metal has been smashed and banged, and it's all bent and misshapen, and his shoes are falling apart and everything. And the little statement down at the bottom of this picture is, some days the dragon wins. And we just have to know that. We just have to learn that. Even though Kohelet wants us, he's preaching to us. He's encouraging us. Lift your eyes. Look at the joyous things. Look at all the wonderful things that God has given us. So rejoice in your job. God has given you a wonderful job to do. He's given you something to do with your hands. Or rejoice in the wife of your youth. And take joy in being married. Your husband, your wife, your kids, take joy in that. And Take joy in your food. When you eat, rejoice in everything that you have to eat and to drink, because all of these things, your job, your spouse, your children, your food, all of these things are wonderful, glorious gifts that God has given you. And yet, some days, the dragon wins. And it's awful. And he takes us through it in his life, that he goes to worship. And he goes to a place where there should be righteousness. And he looks around and he sees that those who should be leading him in righteousness practice unrighteousness. And so he goes to a place where he goes to the law courts. And he knows in the law courts that there should be justice in the law courts. And yet, lo and behold, in the law courts, he finds injustice. And he sees that there are things that should happen to good people, and they don't happen to good people. But he sees that those things happen to bad people. And the things that should happen to bad people are actually happening to good people. And so all of these things cause him to question and to search. And I think his final answer is, folks, some days the dragon wins. But then the final word that we looked at, which I believe is the answer to everything, is the word eternity. And Kohelet teaches that the greatest gift that God has given us is the permanence. The reality that God never changes. And so our life is filled with all of this hebel. Our life is filled with this mist. And in fact, our life itself is just a mist. And all of the things that we try to grab onto and to hold, even if we grab them for a moment, we open our hands and they're gone. And yet, we have God's permanent, eternal presence. And God never changes. And as you read through the book, consider what God has done. And there's no changing what God has done. And what God has done is permanent. What God has done is real. There are some very basic rules, I believe, in understanding these biblical texts that I think are not easy to understand. And I would clearly put the book of Ecclesiastes in that category. It's not an easy book. Sometimes it's kind of hard to figure out, is Kohelet really, does he really live in this gloomy, kind of depressing world, or does he really live in the world of joy? He bounces back and forth, and he comes and he goes. Well, just some things that I would highly recommend as we seek to understand the message of Ecclesiastes. Read the book, if you can, in as many translations as you can. I think that is such an important point. Read the entirety of the book as many times as you can. So many times we just read a chapter and then we stop. And by the time we get back to our Bible reading, we've forgotten what that chapter means, or we've forgotten what chapters 1, 2, and 3 are about. We're trying to figure out, we're jumping into the middle of chapter 4 or something like that. So the book is not that terribly long, and so to read the entirety of the book as many times as possible. Once again, look for repeated words and themes and images. And the one that always trips me up, the one that always gets me, If my interpretation differs from everyone else's primary and well-accepted interpretation and understanding of the text, chances are I'm probably wrong. And I need to come up with some really, 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 really good reasons why I think my interpretation is correct. But sometimes I think it is, and sometimes I have to go back and see where I missed, what I missed. So what did I learn? And hopefully what did I share with you from the book of Ecclesiastes? Number one, our life is a vapor. I know some people think that that is depressing. And I know that some people think that that is gloomy, and why did Kohelet ever mention that? Well, he wants us to know that, not so that we can be depressed. Not so that we can go around saying, woe is me, the sky is falling. You know, we don't want to be an Eeyore kind of Christian. You know, where we just kind of mope along and everything's bad and everything is sad. On the other hand, realize that in this short life, in this life that's a vapor, in this life that's a mist, look at what we have to enjoy. Look at what we have to be joyous about. And a lot of times when those things disappear, our loved ones die. Many of you have had a grandma, a grandpa pass away. Many of us in this auditorium have had maybe a mother or father pass away. Sometimes, for some of us, both have passed. Yes, that's sad. And we grieve. And I guess my father's been gone for 34 years. And yes, I still grieve. Those of you who say, well, you know, time heals all wounds. Sometimes. Yes, we hurt when we lose precious gifts, the life of a loved one, the life of a pet, the loss of a job. These things are all kind of bone-crushing kind of things. But just think of what God has given us to enjoy. And as we look back, I look back on my father's life, my mother's life, my grandparents' lives, even the life of pets that I've lost. And I think what incredible joy they brought to me. Jobs that I have lost, and how much fun I had doing them, and how I loved the life I lived when I had that job. And so, yes, our life is a vapor. Yes, our life is a mist. Not to be depressing, but to get us to open up our eyes and to realize what we have in the here, in the now, while we have this life. And these gifts that God gave us, because God knows who we are. And God knows and cares for us to give us these gifts. Number two, there is incredible joy to be had in this world. We often lose that joy, I'm afraid, because we're so focused on what makes us happy. The search for happiness has destroyed more joy than any kind of evil. Because if we're looking for things to make us happy, as I pointed out in our very, very first lesson, we're looking for circumstances to make us happy, or we're looking for people to make us happy. And no matter how great circumstances are today, they're not going to be that way tomorrow. And no matter how many times people make us happy today, they're going to make us angry or disappoint us tomorrow. And so when we strive to make circumstances, we strive to make people make us happy, we always just end up more miserable and more frustrated. The search for happiness is basically meaningless. Even if we caught it, how long is it going to last? Like I said, if we grab onto it, we open up our hands, and it's gone. Joy, on the other hand, As Kohelet teaches us, joy is a choice. And joy allows us to overcome negative situations and negative people and the fear that these negative situations create. So there is tremendous joy to be had if we will open our eyes and we will seize that joy. Number 3, that opening line from Scar. Everybody knows, even if you don't know the movie, you know the line. Life's not fair. Kohelet would say, life's not fair. Get over it. Sometimes evil and evil people do win. And it's the most frustrating thing in the world that we have to deal with. In a place of righteousness, there is unrighteousness. In a place of justice, there is injustice. Not everybody is going to have a perfectly happy marriage. Not everybody is going to have a perfectly happy job. Not everybody is going to live to be 100 years old and to die a quiet, peaceful death. Those who seek perfection in this world will be miserable. And miserable people blame everybody else and everything else for their misery. If we cannot accept that evil exists, then we will never be able to accept that God has given us a path to overcome that evil. See, and this is where preachers got to come back to earth. Preachers always have our head in the clouds. Preachers are always, look for the sun, look for the rainbow, all that wonderful, glorious preacher talk. We've got to realize that, evil exists. Bad things happen to good people. But God has given us a path to find the way to overcome that evil and to find the joy that Kohelet writes about. The key, as I mentioned earlier, the blessed reality that Kohelet gives us is that God has given us so many countless gifts for us to enjoy. And he gives us the ability to enjoy them, regardless of our situation in life. He lived a very, what we would say, blessed life. I mean, if he identifies himself as king in Jerusalem, which means he was born, as one of our politicians once famously said, with a silver spoon in his mouth. All right? He didn't have to struggle being anybody's slave, I don't think. He didn't have to struggle trying to figure out where his next meal was going to come from. But for Kohelet, that wasn't really the important thing. For Kohelet, the important thing was to look to God. And a slave can find joy in his life just like a prince can find joy in his. The choice or the determining factor there is, where is your faith? Is your faith in a permanent God? Is your faith in a God who never changes? Is your faith in a God who has given you all these wonderful gifts? Or are you looking for happiness in a world that's hebel, that's vain, it's vanity, it's a mist, it's a vapor? And so Kohelet teaches us to look to God when things are falling apart. We sang about when a storm. Every life has storms. I've never met a single person whose life did not have a storm or 2 or 3 in it. That's why I love that song so much, because in the chorus we're talking about being held in the hollow of God's hand. and he holds us, and he protects us. He didn't say the storms will never appear. He said, I'll be with you in your storm, and I will help you get through this storm. And that is what Kohelet is asking us to look for, regardless of our situation. Put your life in the hands of God. And the greatest gift that God has given us is eternity. We as disciples of Christ have this idea of eternity far more certain than he did. He could only look at the cross generations and lifetimes in the future. We can look back on the cross and we can see what God has done for us for eternity. We now know how we can enjoy eternity with God and what it means to be truly blessed by our eternal Heavenly Father. The book of Ecclesiastes certainly, I think, has more to say than that. But these are the lessons that I wanted us to leave with as we conclude at least this study of this beautiful book. If there is anyone this morning who desires to make any statement, perhaps to God himself, make confession of sin to be restored, maybe to make the good confession that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, to be buried with him in baptism. If you just need prayers or would like to unburden your heart to us as your spiritual family, we have this song that we have selected as an invitation song, and we invite you to let us know as we stand and sing.